Welcome, everyone. I'm Chad Livengood, politics editor of the Detroit News, joined by Kaitlyn Buss, assistant editorial page editor. And we're here to break down Governor Whitmer's fifth State of the State address that she just delivered this evening before a live audience, for the first time in a couple of years before a live audience. Last year, she was at a Detroit diesel plant doing a remote broadcast. The year before that, she also did a remote broadcast during the deep, darker years of the pandemic. So, Kaitlyn, let's start off just kind of talking about what was your big takeaways and what did you think were the big themes of this speech?
I thought we saw a very kind of a refreshed Whitmer. She really has become more polished in the past few years. So I thought she did a great job. I mean, honestly, she came out very strong, had a great presentation. She had a Democratic wish list, which I think is to be expected, but she talked about it in a lot of ways like a Republican. I think she really moderated her message on a lot of the key points, like some of the tax reform and other things that, she thinks she can find some wiggle room with centrist Republicans on. There was no appeal to the far right. And at certain points, of course, she talked about the importance of reproductive rights. But even that she talked about in kind of an economic way, not as much of the more emotional plea that we saw during the campaign. So I thought she brought a really moderated approach to it. I think we're seeing kind of the next phase of her political ambitions, but it was a message of bringing people together, and we'll see where it goes. That's what I took away, right from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, this seems very much aimed towards the audience. The audience is there's 56 Democrats and 54 Republicans in the House, and 20 Democrats and 18 Republicans in the Senate. There's not a lot of wiggle room in this legislature for the governor. And we just saw it yesterday when a representative had Joey Andrews had to drive 2 hours across the state in order to cast a vote on a budget bill that Republicans didn't want to vote for. Just to basically close the books, a budget bill, pretty procedural in many ways. But his wife gave birth to their first child in Violet, and Violet got a shout out tonight in the night speech, as did Laura, his wife, who, as the governor said, did all the heavy lifting. And the Representative Andrews had to drive across the state in order to cast a ballot or to cast a vote because they just don't have an extra person laying around who can cast a deciding vote in the House. And so the governor's agenda is very narrow. There's a whole lot of things in this speech tonight that seem to be aimed at trying to get Republicans on board. I mean, she at one point said, when she was talking about her proposal to have universal pre-K for 4-year-olds, she said, I thought that this would be something that could unite everybody.
Yeah. And that was kind of an interesting moment. It's one of those moments where how can you not stand for that? At the same time, that's not what it's necessarily about for all Republicans. It's not necessarily that they don't support that idea, but, they don't support kind of the heavy hand of government, be kind of extending where, they're coming into the home where they feel like that home life should be more important. But it was a moment, and she did take advantage of it in a pretty good way, because it did strike me as a little odd not to see anyone standing, even if you support the sentiment. I was a little disappointed to hear, she very much focused on that early preschool, which we knew she was going to do. And she focused on the young people, supporting voting access and reproductive rights. And then seniors, I thought a really critical group of people in Michigan that she didn't really address was K through 12 kids. And she did get to that a little bit in the tutoring stuff there. But again, that's a little bit disingenuous. She's vetoed some of those tutoring proposals. There's been a lot of back and forth with Republicans and Democrats on some of those specific education, funding allocation areas. But I thought there was a huge hole in the fact that she didn't talk a little bit more seriously and more realistically about the education problems that the state is facing, because that's a really big group of people. And as we're looking at keeping people here and keeping families here and a younger workforce, that's a really huge part of it.
Yeah, she made these comments about these sort of economic vision comments about young people are ambitious. And I thought then we're going to hear something about how we're going to grow the state, like the population is declining And yet instead she kind of pivoted back to this same manufacturing focused economic agenda that she and the Republicans worked together last year in the creation of $1 billion fund to essentially attract electric battery parts plants and electric vehicle investments from the big three. These are manufacturing jobs, and many of them are lower wage manufacturing jobs. They're not. I mean, the jobs that are being created at the Orion GM plant as part of that big deal, they don't pay even the median household income of Oakland County. And so I kept waiting for some kind of like how we're going to get young people who come to University of Michigan from New York, how are we going to get those folks to actually stay and raise a family in Michigan? I didn't hear any of that tonight.
Yeah, it was a bit of an outdated look. And, there's been a lot of small businesses here have really suffered. I mean, the business recovery, we're doing okay, but it hasn't been great. And I didn't hear a lot of messaging to some of those smaller and mid-sized job creators, about how we're going to continue strengthening that. And she hasn't had the greatest track record with the manufacturing incentives and that whole program anyway. I mean, we have not won out, over other states for these huge multi-billion-dollar investments. And, right now taxpayers are paying, $150,000, $160,000 for every one of those jobs that we are creating. And that doesn't really seem sustainable either. So, there was a hole there in that future looking vision.
Well, they've been funding that program with basically much of the surplus money we've had just laying around in Lansing for the last 2 years. But it was interesting. She did call for a permanent funding solution for this. And Craig Mauger, our Lansing reporter, did talk to Quentin Messer after the speech. He's the CEO of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. And as you might expect, they didn't exactly have any details about how they're going to actually fund this or what source of money. But interesting enough, last year there was a college scholarship funded in the budget for four-year universities for folks to create a new state college scholarship. Gives a couple $1,000s towards every kid that qualifies with a certain grade point average and such. And this is like a restoration of what was a merit scholarship when I went to college 20 years ago, and that went away in the Great Recession. As Governor Granholm at the time in the legislature had to cut things. This is a big accomplishment, and I was surprised that Governor Whitmer didn't bring this up. But more interesting enough, there wasn't, they're not talking about we need a permanent funding solution for that. For higher ed in general, which has been in a sort of a stagnation of funding for the better part of this entire century. And so
maybe she's betting on the Biden forgiveness coming through. But.
Well, I mean, that only goes so far. That's old people. That's people's past debt. That doesn't necessarily deal with the reality of today's college costs for folks and such. So,
but to your point, there were a lot of things she didn't tout that she could have. It was a much less bravado than we've seen, during the pandemic and at other more contentious points.
Yeah, we didn't hear a lot of the talking points of the campaign in this speech. I mean, I noted already on Twitter, she didn't say one word about the auto insurance law. And remember last year, she couldn't hand out $400 checks to people fast enough. And so that was definitely missing. And there was a whole lot of other first-term accomplishments she did not take any kind of victory lap on, and then that probably is by design. They didn't want to rub it into the Republicans. Like I said earlier, there's only so many Democrats in this narrow majority. They're going to need Republican votes on a whole host of things if they want to get anything into immediate effect. And I think that's going to really take root here in the economic or the tax policy discussions, because the governor wants to get this pension tax or retirement taxes on retirement income eliminated. And she wants to have it actually go into immediate effect. She's going to need several Republican votes in both the House and the Senate.
Yeah, and that's where, they've already given those concessions. It sounds like, or not necessarily concessions, but they've negotiated on that. It sounds like they're going to, keep somewhat of a different tax structure, depending on public or private and what your what your tax status is, which I know Republicans are not necessarily in favor of. So it'll be interesting to see where they go on that.
What did you think about the way that she went about talking about abortion and the victories that Democrats did get on that issue in the election, and how she wants to frame it and go and try to recruit businesses from Ohio and Indiana where they have much stricter abortion laws than we do now?
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting. I think for most people who have passionate feelings on that issue, you're not necessarily going to change, their opinion one way or another, especially in a state of the state speech. So I thought she approached it from a smarter way than she has in the past. And that was to kind of talk about it in this broader sense, like, look, this is settled. Getting rid of the 1931 law is a formality. So this is settled law now here in Michigan. And where can I find those people that might see it from a little bit different perspective? Now that women do have that right, let's work with it and use it to our benefit. She of course was not trying to appeal to any of the people that are staunchly pro-life or have strong feelings about that, but I thought it was a smart approach. It kind of struck me a little odd, honestly, at first, because I haven't quite heard her talk about it that way, but that's why I think it signals kind of a new era for sorting out this post Prop 3 world and how Michigan can benefit from its abortion laws. Obviously, that's not going to win over, far right conservatives.
Yeah, well, I guess it remains to be seen whether the governor can get a big corporation to move from Indianapolis to Detroit, and then will she have to throw a bunch of tax incentives in there just to make it all happen? But
yeah, and if the demand, really is there, if that really is going to be kind of a moving issue for people to change location for.
Yeah. One other thing we did not hear about tonight was right to work. For all the pent up demand by Democrats and labor unions to repeal right to work and to make it a top issue. There was not one word about it. It wasn't even a word about labor law or unions out of the governor's mouth tonight. So that was another thing that was noticeably missing in her agenda.
Yep. Yeah, and I thought, the way that she kind of presented everything, it blunted a little bit of Nesbitt's, response afterward. They came across perhaps a little bit more aggrieved, but that might also be the reality for a lot of people, and I think it is. So, where Whitmer kind of had this, we're back to normal, we're back in Lansing and business as usual. There's still a lot of people, feeling the effects of inflation, feeling the effects of the pandemic, still trying to recover from that. So it was an interesting response from Republicans, interesting setting. I thought it was a sharp contrast.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of a final thought about the tax policy and the inflation. The what's kind of we're going to see here in the next few months is the 2015 law should trigger an income tax cut, and the rate will be rolled back from 4.25% to maybe as low as 4.05%. And at the same time, that's from a Republican authored law from 2015 that was baked into a gas tax increase back in 2015 under Governor Snyder. And now the Democrats are trying to move this package of bills on the cutting the taxes on pensions and other retirement income, and then increasing the earned income tax rate. And interesting enough, yesterday, Angela Whitmer, the top House Democrat, who is the chair of the Appropriations Committee, when asked whether they were going to stop the rollback, she said, quote, "We're not going to commit political suicide." And that was a really interesting, telling comment, because that means they probably won't try to step in and stop the rollback, because I think there's probably some fear that they could repeat history, and go back to 1983 when Jim Blanchard, the Democratic governor, and had a Democratic legislature, and he passed an income tax increase, and a couple of Democratic senators got recalled, and within a year he had lost his majority in the Senate, and a guy named John Engler became the Senate Majority Leader, and we had Englerism from then on. Essentially. So Angela Whitmer, who chaired the House Democratic Campaign Committee, clearly knows that they could lose a majority just as fast as they get it.
Yeah, I mean, most people in Michigan, there's $9 billion sitting there. It'd be a hard sell to say we can't give any of that back to you.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we'll see.
Well, Kaitlyn Buss, assistant editorial page editor, thanks for coming on, and thank you all, Detroit News readers. We all very much appreciate you reading and engaging with us every day.
Yes, come back for more. Thanks, Chad.
All right, thank you.
Bye.